Hello and welcome to the fourth video in our database wrapper series. I'm super excited about this video because now we are going to start making some magic happen. We have our database connection, but connecting to a database is not all that useful. So let's continue on with our database class here and continue as we go, whatever that means. So what we're going to do here is create a public function, and we're going to call this query. And what I want to do here is I want to use this to where I can pass raw queries that I write in my program. And also, I'm going to use this method with other methods. So we're going to create basic create, read, update, delete methods in this class, and they're going to all use this query method. So that's why we're starting with the query method. But you can also use this query method to pass more complex SQL queries into it. And we're also going to build into this security where we bind our values. So anytime you have user input or AJAX calls or anything like that people could do SQL injection, you'll want to bind those values. And what happens is it actually prepares the statement and then it binds it before it executes the statement. And what happens is anything that gets bound is turned into a string. So if someone does pass SQL commands into your input, it just simply is read as string and it's not executed. So that's how this prevents SQL injection. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do here, if you look here, we have this error message and that's set to false. Well, every time I run this query, I want to go ahead and reset that error message because since this is a singleton pattern, there could be an error from a previous query that would be sitting there. And so I do want to reset that. So in order to do that, we're going to access that with this underscore error, and we're just going to set that to false. Okay, so basically we call the query, it's just going to reset this to false. If we haven't used query method at all, it's already going to be false, but that's okay. The next thing that I want to do is we're going to go ahead and prepare, okay? We're going to prepare our SQL statement. So the first parameter that gets passed in here is going to be SQL. So the way that PDO works with this is, let's see, we're going to do this inside of an if statement. There we go. So the way that this works is we're going to say this query equals this PDO, and remember that this PDO is this PDO object, and we have a pre-built method called prepare. And so we're going to do, what are we going to prepare there? Whoa, that's not right. You got to spell it correctly. So what are we going to prepare? Well, the SQL that is passed in. We're going to prepare the SQL statement. Okay, so if that prepares successfully, we'll move on. Okay, so let me see here just for a second. Yeah, so let's go ahead and set up our return. So we'll return, what are we going to return? The entire object on our query. So if this runs, we're going to return this. Of course, this is going to return this regardless, even if it bypasses this. But everything that we're going to do in here is only if the prepare is successful. If the prepare doesn't work, well, we can't do anything else anyway. So here we go. The other thing we talk about here is count. So what I want to do is, let's just go ahead and create a variable inside here called x, and we'll set that equal to 1, so that we can go ahead and, oh, I'm sorry. That's not what I've used this for. I apologize. This is actually, we're going to start talking about binding next. So this SQL will be the SQL statement that we pass in. But like I said, we want to be able to bind our values, any sort of value that's user input, or there's a potential for SQL injection, we want to bind. So I'm setting this X so that we can use it in our bind we're going to go through a loop later. So let's just call this, for fun, let's call it values. And then what we're going to do is if count values. So if any values are passed in as a second parameter, which will be the bound values. Actually, you know what? We're going to use this for other things too, so let's put this in params. Okay? So if count params. Okay? So if this is not an empty array, okay, so let's go ahead and make that an array by default. So it is an empty array by default, so that we don't have to pass this. We can just send a raw query if we want with this. But if there are params, we need to do something about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say this query. So what we're going to do is bind value. Now this is also a pre-built method that comes with PDO. So we're going to bind value, and x is going to be the index. I don't know why, but values, when they're passed in as an array, are not zero indexed. They actually get, I guess it's because it's SQL, for some reason they started that with 1, so that's why we set this equal to 1 on the first iteration of this. But anyhow, we're going to go ahead and we're going to bind x. Well, I screwed up. What we want to do is actually loop through these params. Okay, so let's say for each params as param, and then what we're going to do is this query bind value x, and x is the value, and then, well, x is the key of the value. So then what we're going to actually do is pass in the param here. And then after that, what we need to do is increment x, so x plus plus. So what's going to happen is for every parameter, which I could have called this values or whatever, because these are just basically going to be bound values. And I'll show you how that works in just a moment. But it's going to come down, it's going to see if those are set. If they're set, it's going to loop through all of them and bind those to the query. So the query's been prepared. Then we're going through and binding all of the values to that quick prepared SQL statement. Now, by the way, a prepared SQL statement would look something like, you know, oops, sorry about that. It would look something like select star from contacts where name, you know, maybe first name equals, and then instead of putting user input here, you just put a question mark. And we can say and last name equals another question mark, right? So this is this prepared statement, and this first question mark is 1. So the first element of this array could be, if it were passed in, it would look something like, you know, my name is Curtis, and then the second element of that array is param. So so Curtis would get bound here in this bind value, and then the second one, so this x would be incremented, and it would come through this loop again, and it would bind the second parameter would be param. So that's how that works. And you wouldn't do it inside the class, obviously. I'm just showing you like an example of how that works. So now that we have our values bound, the next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and execute the query. And what I want to do there is basically do another if statement, because, you know, we just want to make sure this is all successful. So this query, and then another method that we have is execute. So this actually, once all the values are bound, it will actually execute the query. So when that happens, what we want to do, and let's actually do an else statement here, but when it's executed, we want to set these we want to set all these parameters up. Okay, so the first one we'll do is say this, and this is probably the most important for our application, is results. Okay, so that's a private parameter. I'm sorry, a private property, and we're going to say this results equals this query. Now we have another method called fetch all. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and fetch these as an object. So we have PDO fetch object. Since we're working with object-oriented programming, that makes sense. So basically, it executes the query, and then we have query here, and then the results we do the fetch all method, and we set those equal. We set our results equal to those fetched rows from the database or from the query. So then what we want to do also is say this count equals this query, sorry about that, this query row count. Again, that's already set up for us, it's not something we have to write. And this last insert ID is going to be equal to, now we're not going to use query this time, we actually need to use our PDO handler here, so it's going to be PDO instead of query, and a method on that is last insert ID. Okay, so that sets all of these up, and then actually returns the entire object back when we run that query. The last thing that I want to do is, if this execute fails, we're actually going to set up this error equals true. So that'll set this error here to true. We'll know that this failed for some reason. Okay? So then we have returned that object. Okay, so how do we use this now? So we have the query method written. How do we use this? Well, let's jump over to our index page, and let's just insert a row into our database. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to say something like this. Oops, not this. We have DB set up, so DB query, that's the method we just wrote, okay? And then the first parameter of this is going to be our, let's see. Yeah, so the first parameter is our we'll leave that for now. So let's write our raw query here. So let's say insert into contacts, and then set this up. All right. So let's see how many F name, L name, email, cell phone, and home phone. So our fields are going to be F name. These are actually backticks, not single quotes. So F name, L name, email, and I did it again with the single quotes. It is not single quotes. Cell phone and home phone. Alright, so in the values, we would normally do something like this, Curtis, but let's assume that this is going to be bound values and that this is user input from a form or something. So in that case, what we're going to do is put a question mark for each one of these. Okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we have 5 question marks. Now, for our array here, I don't want to put this on one line. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set up contact here. Contact is going to equal an array. And we're going to go ahead and populate this. So Curtis, Parham, Curtis at sharklasers.com, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And for my home number, we'll do 555, 555, 5. Let's go ahead and give it an area code 555 as well. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. And so we're going to pass it in as our second parameter, so I'm going to say contact. Now if I refresh the page, it should, if we did everything correctly. We didn't get any sort of feedback here, but if I go to content now, refresh, you can see that that has been inserted into my database. I could do another one here and just my wife's name here, and we'll refresh again, and there we go. So what's happening is our database has been instantiated. We've set that database object to DB, so now we have access to any public functions that or methods that we write there. So we wrote query, and we can pass raw queries and actually bind values now. And the reason that that's super cool is now we can avoid SQL injection and bind all of our user inputted values into the database. So be careful to go ahead and use binding for, let's say, for anything. I mean, AJAX calls or anything that someone could actually send information into your database. All right, well, that's how we use the raw query method. We're going to write well, this video is going to go a little bit longer, but let's go ahead and write a few more really quick methods to where we could do some cool stuff. So let's get rid of contacts, and let's change this now that we have some records, and let's put select star from contacts. Just say order by L name. Just do it without the single quotes, L, or the backticks. And then also first name. So we'll order by both of those. I'm not going to bind anything here, so I'm going to get rid of that second parameter to make sure that still works without that. And then if I refresh the page, you can see that actually nothing happens. So we need to write a few functions that will allow us to access these private properties, because by default a private property cannot be accessed, and that's a good thing. So let's go ahead and write those really quick. They're basically going to be getters, and they're going to be super easy. Like, I mean, really easy. And that's why we're going to try to force them onto the end of this video here. So let me get set up here, and we will jump in and get going. So the first thing that we're going to need is we need to know those results, right? So we're setting the results here, but we don't have a way to get those once they're set. So let's create a public function, and we're going to call it results. Okay? It's going to take no parameters. And really all we're going to do is return this results. I told you that's easy. All right. And just while we're here, let's go ahead and create a few more. Let's do public function count. And we'll return, you guessed it, this count. Okay? Oops. And we might as well create one for error so that we can do some checks to see if something fails. Oops. Turn this error. And one more. Might as well get our last inserted ID. So this, our public function last ID. And we're going to return this last insert ID. So now we can use any of these on our object. So what we need to do is actually set this, set this equal to something. So we'll set this equal to query. All right. Now that that's been set to query, what we can do is say contacts equals query results. Okay. Yep. So just let's go ahead and dump those out to the screen here. All right, that's kind of hard to see. So let's we'll use this later too. So let's go ahead and set up a few functions that will make things nice for us later, since we're not really doing any sort of user interface. I'm going to create a function called dump and die, so D and D, and we'll just pass in dump here. And what we're going to do is, what do we want to call this? I don't care, we'll call it HTML. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some pre-tags here. And then I'm going to do a let's try this, bar dump, and then we will do concatenate on closing pre-tag, and then return HTML. See if that works. Oops. So we'll use our new dump and die method. What did I do wrong here? Let's see, bar dump. Let's do it like this. There we go. So now we have an array, and we have our two objects. So our results is an array of objects. Okay, so it's important to understand, and that came from our fetch all method here. We set the results equal to that, and then we actually ran that function on our query object. So query, and we ran the query, and then contacts is actually equal to this. So then the other thing that we can do with this is we can say count. Okay, then we can say count is equal. Oops. Count is equal to, and then again we're going to use our query, And remember, we have that count method that we just wrote. So we can do something like echo count. Refresh, and you can see 2 there at the top of the browser. We have 2. So that's working. I don't think we could do this, but let's try echo query last insert last ID is what we called it. Fresh 0. We didn't really insert anything on this round, so that's going to come back with 0. But that will work. And then we can actually var dump query error. See if there's an error. This should be false, so it should be a Boolean returned, and it's false. If I screwed up this statement here, I could do error. That Boolean right there is error true, so we can do some checks on that to make sure things are correct. So that's all working. And so in the next video, what we're going to do, we have our query method, but we're going to write a few more really useful functions to make our lives a lot easier. And that's the whole purpose of this, write a database wrapper, is to easily do things with our database. So I'm excited about the next video, and I will see you then.